It didn't roar like a siege drum or whistle like an arrow. It simply struck, silent, invisible, lethal. This was the ballista, and it turned the Roman war into an equation of terror. It could pierce two men and their shields in a single, dry shot. This is the story of Rome's mechanical sniper, and why its silence was more feared than the roar of 10,000 men. For centuries, Roman legions dominated the battlefield not only with discipline and strategy, but with a mechanical precision that few ancient peoples could match. While the centurions and legionaries secured the ground, there was a machine that provided the backbone of technological superiority. An artifact that could launch iron bolts at over 100 kilometers per hour, pierce shields, armor, and still continue its terrifying trajectory. Its impact was so devastating that it not only caused immediate death, but a specific kind of paralyzing panic that rippled through enemy formations. The ballista was the ultimate long-distance killer. It represented a uniquely Roman solution to the chaos of ancient warfare, to impose order and control from beyond the reach of the enemy, transforming the entire field of battle into a kill zone. The Roman military mind was obsessed with efficiency. They did not favor the crude, imprecise engines of war that relied on raw, untamed force and random chance. Instead, they perfected systems, standardized components, and distributed lethal power evenly across their vast armies. The ballista was the zenith of this philosophy. It was a weapon of pure engineering, transforming the battlefield from a messy clash of men into a problem of physics, geometry, and calculation. Where tribal forces relied on courage, a furious charge, and brute strength, Rome countered with calm, calculated violence delivered from hundreds of yards away. It wasn't about who was the strongest, it was about who was the most precise, the most disciplined, and the most technologically advanced. This lethal engine was a direct declaration of principles. It affirmed to every barbarian leader, every rebel army, and every walled city that Rome was not only coming for them, but that Rome had already measured their demise with cold, terrifying certainty. The psychological effect of a weapon that offered no warning, that delivered death directly and brutally without an arc or a shout, was immense. Before the Roman soldier had even drawn his short sword, the ballista had already broken the enemy's will to fight. It was the epitome of Roman mastery, silent power in the service of total conquest. The true genius of the ballista was not its size, but its integration. It wasn't a novelty brought out for special occasions, sitting unused in a supply depot. It was an embedded, mandatory part of the legionary toolkit. Every Roman camp, every siege line, every fortified outpost utilized the standardized, disciplined power of these machines, placing them on elevated platforms to provide superior coverage. The ballista didn't just kill, it organized the chaos, and that was profoundly, distinctly Roman. But for this perfect weapon to exist, Rome had to learn its greatest lesson from the one enemy they never expected, a brilliant mathematician who broke their legions. But the lethal equation wasn't entirely Roman. To find the source of this power, we must travel hundreds of years and cross the sea to the workshops of Hellenistic ingenuity, where the very seeds of mechanical warfare were sown. The journey begins not with a war machine, but with a rudimentary device known as the gastrophetes, or the belly bow, created in the 5th century before Christ. This type of primitive crossbow was simple but innovative, using the considerable force of the operator's body to brace and tension the weapon. This allowed it to launch projectiles with greater power and speed than a traditional handheld bow. It was an early, critical recognition that the human muscle alone was insufficient for the growing demands of the ancient battlefield. It was a crucial step toward mechanization, but it was still a brute force weapon, relying on simple tension. The real revolution occurred in the city of Syracuse, in Sicily, a vibrant hub of culture and conflict and home to immense intellectual wealth. Here, the tyrant Dionysius I made a decision that was unprecedented in the Greek world. He hired full-time, state-funded military engineers, permanently assigning genius to the art of killing. Before this, technology was often a matter of philosophical curiosity or wartime improvisation. Dionysius transformed it into a dedicated, professional arm of the military machine. From these dedicated workshops emerged the breakthrough, the first torsion-powered machines. The principle was simple and explosive. Ropes of tightly twisted sinews or human hair, when wound up and compressed, stored a colossal, explosive amount of potential energy. When released, this stored tension was unleashed in an instant, propelling a bolt or stone with terrifying velocity. Thus were born the first authentic catapulti and ballistae. The age of mechanical warfare had begun, fundamentally changing the strategic landscape. The next great patron of these machines was Alexander the Great. During his famous siege of Tyre in 332 before Christ, he employed these newly developed machines not just to assault the formidable walls, but for a new, revolutionary tactical purpose. He used them to sweep the battlements clear of enemy archers and slingers, systematically neutralizing threats and preparing the way for his heavy siege towers to approach safely. Artillery was no longer a defensive luxury. It had become an extension of the army on campaign, a flexible tool used to suppress and isolate the enemy before the main advance. The Greeks, however, never fully committed to this new technological path. They used the machines sporadically, mainly for defense, treating them as specialized, auxiliary tools. Their military doctrine remained focused on the disciplined phalanx and strategic maneuver. They were brilliant inventors, but they lacked the systematic, industrial impulse necessary to make artillery the bedrock of their military system. They saw technology as a complement. The Romans, however, saw a blueprint for total mathematical conquest, and they were about to steal it. But as Rome began its expansion into the eastern Mediterranean, it came into contact with these Hellenistic kingdoms, Syracuse, Macedonia, the Seleucids, and they took note. The Romans, with their obsessive need for standardization and discipline, didn't just adopt these machines, they weaponized their very production, implementing them globally across their forces. They saw in the ballista a way to impose their will with mathematical certainty. To conquer the West, they first needed to understand this genius of the East. If you are fascinated by the incredible battles and engineering feats that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe now to the channel and join our journey through history's greatest secrets. They took the Greek equation of torsion and prepared to solve it on a scale the Hellenic world could never have imagined. But first, they had to be shown the true, crushing power of the ballista by the very man who defined ancient engineering. Rome adopted machines from the Hellenistic world, but it was during one of their most brutal sieges that they understood their true, terrifying potential. The siege of Syracuse was a masterclass in pain, and it was engineered by one man. Rome, locked in the desperate struggle of the Second Punic War, was led by the general Marcus Claudius Marcellus against the formidable defenses of Syracuse in 214 before Christ. The Romans expected a tough fight, but what they faced was not an army, but an insurmountable wall of mechanical genius. The city's defense was orchestrated by its most brilliant citizen, the legendary mathematician and inventor, Archimedes. According to ancient accounts, including those of Plutarch and Livy, Archimedes designed machines that repelled the Roman attacks with a precision that seemed to border on the supernatural. Roman troops were shattered by bolts that seemed to defy gravity, stones that crushed ships, and terrifying cranes that lifted vessels from the water, only to smash them against the harbor walls. The Romans were not fighting men, they were fighting a mind that had turned the city into a vast, lethal machine, where every angle and distance was calculated for maximum carnage. The ballistae and catapults under Archimedes' command fired with such accuracy that the Roman soldiers learned to dread the sound of their quiet release more than the shouts of the defenders. Although Syracuse eventually fell, the lesson was permanent, and the cost of the victory was seared into the Roman military consciousness. Artillery, the Romans realized, could no longer be an occasional complement. It needed to be the linchpin of the entire military structure, a guaranteed component of every major campaign. From that moment forward, the integration of artillery was total. Every Roman legion, the foundation of the empire's power, came to include artillery engineers, known as the Ballistari, and a complete, standardized complement of ballistae. This was a logistical and engineering commitment on a vast, unprecedented scale, establishing the first true military-industrial complex. By the time of Julius Caesar, this doctrine was fully mature. In his sieges at Alesia and Avaricum, Caesar used these machines not just to destroy fortifications, but to control the perimeter, checking enemy sallies and keeping the defenders under a constant, demoralizing rain of fire. The ballista's power was not just destructive, it was strategic. It helped the Roman general impose order on the chaos, asserting control over the vast geometry of the battlefield before the physical clash even began. It signaled to friend and foe alike that Roman strategy was not left to chance. It was written in iron bolts and twisted sinew. The time had now come to refine this weapon, to make it more standardized, more reproducible, and ultimately, more terrifyingly effective. The ballista would cease to be a clever weapon and would become a declaration of mechanical perfection. It looked like a massive crossbow, but that was a lie. The ballista was not brute carpentry. It was a weapon of pure mathematics, a meticulous, lethal equation designed by minds like Vitruvius. The Roman ballista was a work of calculation and millimeter-perfect design. It wasn't about relying on sheer size, which would sacrifice mobility and accuracy, but on mathematical precision, allowing for standardized production and maximum force output. Every part of the ballista was measured according to complex proportions established by celebrated engineers, most notably Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, the architect of the 1st century before Christ. For the Romans, this weapon was not improvised. It was designed as a flawless equation in wood, metal, and tension. The heart of the ballista was its 2 vertical columns, the cheek pieces, which housed the torsion springs. These were thick ropes of animal sinew, or sometimes even human hair, tightly twisted and often soaked in substances like vinegar to preserve their elasticity and maximize the stored energy. This incredible, hidden tension was the engine of its power. When the launching arms were drawn backward using a hand-cranked winch, the sinew ropes were compressed with tremendous force. When the trigger was released, that potential energy was violently unleashed, rotating the arms forward with an explosive, dry thrust. The result was not a parabolic arc, like a catapult, but a straight, low trajectory, silent, unannounced, and almost always fatal. In the center, between the arms, lay a long, smooth groove called the canalis. This guided the iron bolt or dart, which could measure up to 1 meter long, ensuring a perfectly straight and precise trajectory upon firing. Everything was built to maximize efficiency and minimize deviation. Tensioning the ballista was a meticulous operation that demanded a coordinated team of at least 4 men. One soldier placed the projectile, another turned the winch, a third checked the tension of the ropes, and a fourth gave the firing signal. Furthermore, the specialized ballistari had to constantly account for environmental conditions. Humidity could loosen the sinews, while extreme heat could cause them to shrink and snap the arms. These specialists often adjusted the tension multiple times a day, treating the machine not as a piece of lumber, but as a finely tuned instrument, a necessity, as a single error could result in a failed shot or a destroyed, violently malfunctioning weapon. But the ultimate fear this machine delivered wasn't mechanical, it was psychological. Thanks to this obsession with standardized design, the ballista was one of the first truly industrially produced military weapons. Its components could be manufactured separately, transported easily in crates complete with bronze screws, sinew springs, and numbered wooden pieces, and assembled in a matter of hours anywhere in the empire. It was an unprecedented feat of military logistics, ensuring that Roman power was deployable and reproducible from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Britannia. This machine was not a mechanical curiosity, it was an extension of the Roman military mind, and behind its structure of wood and rope beat the pulse of the empire: discipline, calculation, and silent, deadly power. If you enjoy learning about the forgotten tools and strategies that built ancient empires, please take a moment to comment below and let us know which piece of engineering or military history you'd like us to explore next. Now that the perfect killing machine was built, the Romans were ready to unleash its true purpose: to dominate the mind of the enemy. Unlike the bellowing catapults, the ballista offered no warning. Its purpose was not just destruction, but complete, sudden demoralization. It delivered a silent message of Roman power. In the midst of ancient battle, there was always chaos, noise, and the chance for a hero's intervention. The ballista stripped that away. Its shot was dry, direct, and brutal. An iron bolt could pierce one soldier and the comrade standing behind him. There was no arc in the air, no time to react, just immediate, calculated death. This was the ultimate psychological weapon. During the Empire's hardest sieges, like the siege of Jerusalem in 70 after Christ, the historian Flavius Josephus relates that the defenders feared the Roman machines more than they feared the soldiers themselves. Bodies were hurled from the walls, limbs were severed, and the defenders' shouts were drowned out by the metallic clash of incoming projectiles. The ballista didn't just destroy the stone walls, it utterly demoralized the spirit of the men defending them. In open battle, Roman commanders used the ballista like a modern sniper rifle. They didn't waste its lethal precision on rank-and-file soldiers, but focused their fire on high-value targets, enemy chiefs, standard-bearers, or fast-moving light cavalry. Imagine the scene. A tribal leader stands before his army, giving a rousing speech, and suddenly, a bolt pierces him. He falls lifeless, and the enemy army loses its cohesion before the fighting has even begun. The psychological effect was devastating, a surgical strike that brought down entire regiments. The Romans understood that in ancient warfare, the perception of power was vital, often more important than brute force. The ballista became the perfect physical messenger for that message. We can kill you without you seeing it coming. This invisible threat enforced tactical discipline across the entire length of the Roman line, ensuring that fear was the first weapon used. Even at sea, this engineering genius found a way. Smaller, lighter versions like the Scorpio were mounted on the prows of warships. During the famous naval Battle of Actium in 31 before Christ, the ships of Octavian, the future Augustus, used this mobile artillery to damage sails, break masts, and clear enemy decks before the final boarding action. It was a perfect lethal combination of naval maneuver and surgical precision, but every empire has its twilight. With the slow collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, the intricate structure that made these machines possible was also lost. The schools of engineering became extinct, the highly trained ballistari dispersed, and the technical treatises were forgotten or destroyed. For centuries, Europe retained only fragments and smaller, less powerful variants of this lost technology. Yet, the ballista's legacy survived in its principles. Medieval crossbows inherited its basic form and mechanism. Great siege weapons like the trebuchet adopted its logic of precise calculation. And centuries later, brilliant minds like Leonardo da Vinci would rediscover Vitruvius's treatises, meticulously retracing those ancient plans and marveling at a machine that had turned war into pure geometry so long ago. The ballista was not just a war tool, it was a declaration of principles. In its elegant, lethal design, Rome expressed its obsession with control, discipline, and order in the midst of chaos. And every time one of those machines fired a straight, silent, mortal projectile, it was as if the empire itself affirmed, the world belongs not to the strongest, but to the most precise. And it was this cold, calculated claim that ultimately ensured the ballistas and Rome's terrifying legacy. If you found this exploration of Roman military engineering compelling, please take a moment to share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. The story of the ballista is a powerful reminder that history isn't always made by the largest armies, but sometimes by the greatest minds. If you want to see more stories about the incredible technology and battles that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe to our channel and activate the bell to not miss any new episodes. And tell us in the comments, do you believe any ancient civilization surpassed the Romans in military precision? Thank you for joining us until the end.